Hi, I'm Duncan Buchan, and this is no time for games. This is war. In the 1990s, while the video game market was still reeling over a lengthy battle of supremacy between Nintendo and Sega, Sony, a company known for their electronics products, movie business, and a bunch of game shows your dad likes, decided that now would be a great time to enter the market. They were right. The Sony PlayStation immediately took the world by storm, beating their competitors by taking advantage of revolutionary new technologies like CD-ROMs and having games people actually wanted to play. Sony's new system sold over 100 million units compared to the measly 33 million that the N64 sold. Great job, team. You'll get them next time. It's not even worth telling you what the Sega Saturn sold because it barely did. It's a console built exclusively for weird guys who really like to tell you how much they like underrated gems like Panzer Dragoon 2's Y or Power Slave. And that momentum kept going with the console sequel, the PlayStation 2, becoming the highest selling console of all time, with Nintendo's next system making 14% of that. Maybe that time was a little slip up. I'm sure you'll actually get them next time. Sony had reason to be cocky, but they weren't the only ones able to one-up Nintendo. Bill Gates is a name you probably know. He's the Microsoft dork. The kind you'd shove into a locker. He had an idea for a box that would play Xbox games. Hence the name, the Xbox. They were able to make a name for themselves with technology seen as standard now, like a built-in hard drive, robust networking capabilities, and some great exclusives like Halo, and the second Halo, and a map pack for the second Halo. But both of them had the future to consider. Sony had already started work on their next system. After conquering the world with the PlayStation 2, their next big idea was the PlayStation 3. It would take everything about the PS2 to the next level. Full backwards compatibility, a Blu-ray drive, 4 USB slots, 3 slots for different flash memory formats. But Microsoft knew they could challenge Sony's seat at the table, so they positioned their next system, the Xbox 360, to kill them. With a bigger focus on online play, double the RAM, the works. They set their release date in the holiday season to compete directly with Sony. And they both got their systems out for the holiday season. The difference is, Microsoft miscalculated and arrived a year early, giving them a massive head start. This would be the beginning of the saga known as the console. Ow! Ah, fuck! Oh, it's gonna leave a mark. Oh, fuck. Run the intro, run the intro. We're now in the year after Microsoft launched the 360. In 2006, Sony were in panic mode, which sets the stage for their now infamous E3 press conference, where PlayStation heads Phil Harrison and Kaz Hirai took the stage to prove they still had it.
And we're not about cutting corners to rush a product to market, and we're certainly not interested in gimmicks, clever rhetoric, or conventional thinking. We have said on many occasions that the next generation doesn't start until we say it does.
This next generation featured such highlights as Genji Days of the Blade, the sequel to the PS2 hit Genji Dawn of the Samurai, based on real accounts of the Genpei War. It's the crab game. It's the game with the big crab. This CG trailer for a cancelled game called 8 Days that's trying way too hard to look like actual gameplay with its usage of the HUD, that I'm certain should not be legal. A highly detailed 3D model of Tiger Woods who reacts realistically when you press buttons.
That's what I'm talking about.
Cool! And the bombastic finale of Hideo Kojima's Metal Gear Solid 4. Followed by the actual finale of a guy going ham on the 6-axis. Look at him go! But then, Kaz Hirai takes the stage once again to deliver what could arguably be the moment the PS3 would fail.
The 20GB PlayStation 3 will retail for $499 US and 549 Canadian dollars. And the 60GB PlayStation 3 for $599 US.
For context, the 360's most expensive model cost $399. In today money, the 60GB PS3 would cost $908. For the first time since their debut, PlayStation started this generation in last place, with the 360 taking an early lead over the PS3. But I never said they were first. After a monumental fall over the past 2 generations, Nintendo came back with a console that your gran would feel good playing. And your gran bought that console 100 million times. Nintendo really did get them next time. The Nintendo Wii catered to a demographic the others were neglecting, so even with their relative successes, they couldn't compete. But that didn't stop them trying. Sony's answer to this was the PlayStation Move. It was a ball on a stick, it didn't last long, but Microsoft had bigger plans. And in 2009, they showed off their next big idea at E3. It's a great showing. Sam Laker's incredible hair show off Alan Wake, Hideo Kojima reveals the new Metal Gear coming to Xbox for the first time, and Joe Staten premieres the next title in Microsoft's flagship franchise, Halo Reach. But the cracks are showing. Reach was the last game on Bungie's contract with Microsoft, the end of an era. There's a notable portion given to the Xbox as an entertainment platform, and the big finale of the conference is dedicated in its entirety to Project Natal, or as it would come to be known, the Kinect. The basic concept of the Kinect is that you're the controller. Unlike other primitive forms of motion control, the system and the games on it are controlled entirely with your body to do things like run, jump, skateboard, or take part in this enlightening demo of a girl purchasing a dress while on a call with a friend and then placing that dress on a lifelike 3-dimensional full-body image of herself. This was the dream of the Kinect. No controllers, the future of entertainment. In practice, they bring out the most hungover guy to ever exist to fumble his way through avatar creation. Something you can already do with a controller. There's a massive disconnect between the rest of the show and the Kinect reveal. They spend an hour and a half talking about all the games they really want you to play with a controller, including a skateboarding game with a proprietary skateboarding controller, and then spend the last half hour talking about how the controller is an outdated piece of plastic that acts as a barrier for entry. That disconnect would come to define Microsoft's efforts towards the end of the generation. They had a strong start courting the hardcore audience, but they wanted more. They wanted what the Wii had. They wanted the Xbox brand to be everything. A platform for the hardcore gamers, a place for casuals to hang out, the hub of all entertainment. The Kinect itself sold well. Within the first 2 months of its release, it sold over 10 million units, becoming the fastest selling consumer electronics device ever. But while this was happening, Sony was gaining on Microsoft. While the 360 was looking like the clear winner, something notable was happening. With price cuts, redesigns, and a bevy of exclusives that people actually wanted to play, the PS3 sales were neck and neck with the 360, eventually overtaking them by the end. This is what sets the stage for the next generation. In January of 2012, over a year before the next generation of consoles was even shown to the public, Kotaku released a report that Microsoft's next system would use a form of DRM that would lock users from playing used games. It was a troubling rumor. Used games are a massive business. The act of trading in 20 games you bought a year ago at full price, also you can afford half of a new release, is a time-honored tradition for gamers. But it was also a boon for the moneymakers. As opposed to a new game where the company who made it would see a cut of the profits of a used game go directly to the vendor selling it. So it makes hypothetical sense to lock this market from your console to make more money, as the platform holder would also see a cut of the new game profit. In practice though, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Over the course of the first half of 2013, both Microsoft and Sony showed off their shiny new boxes, the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 to varying degrees of success. Nobody really remembers the PS4 reveal, mainly because the Xbox One reveal was a disaster. It's a lot of talk about TV. The opening montage makes that abundantly clear.
For the first time, you and your TV are going to have a relationship.
Look, I love my TV, but I don't want to fuck it. Unless... To understand just how much they were fucking it before their big E3 showing, there's a name you should know. Don Mattrick. Don was the face of the Xbox One. As head of interactive entertainment software at Xbox, he was the main guy people talked to about the Xbox One being always online, and the Xbox One locking used games. This gave us an enlightening interview with gaming's answer to stalebread Jeff Keighley, where he gave us this wonderful nugget.
And fortunately we have a product for people who aren't able to get some form of connectivity. It's called Xbox 360.
Barely a month after this interview, he left Microsoft entirely to become CEO of Zynga. Classy. How was E3 then? It was actually pretty decent in retrospect. Some great titles were shown off, both exclusive and multi-platform, like Killer Instinct in The Witcher 3. Though Hideo Kojima does show up again to show off Metal Gear Solid 5, and with how much he and Phil Harrison show up in these things, I'm convinced they're the manifestation of death itself. But the notable portion is the price, where another Phil Spencer, would come out to reveal,
Now, I'm excited to announce that Xbox One will launch this November in 21 markets around the world at $499 in the US, 499 euros in European markets.
for that price, you'd be getting the Xbox One, but also the new and improved Kinect, that was a required piece of kit that the console wouldn't work without. While the Kinect was popular at launch, word that it barely fucking worked spread fast, so the prospect of it being permanently on, listening and watching, wasn't great. At Sony's E3 in 2013, they announced the PS4 would be 20% cheaper than the Xbox One and do the exact opposite of everything it was doing in this now iconic speech.
When a gamer buys a PS4 disc, they have the rights to use that copy of the game. They can trade in the game at retail, sell it to another person, lend it to a friend, or keep it forever.
The gaming landscape is changing with new business models and new ways to play. But at PlayStation, concepts like true consumer ownership and consumer trust are central to everything we do.
Those 2 minutes represent the actual moment that Sony overtook Microsoft. After Microsoft tried to cater to a wide audience, Sony were able to sneak under them with slightly hollow platitudes completely contrasting the Xbox One. Functionally, they didn't innovate at all. The PS4 is a game system that plays games with media apps. Most of its new features are worthless. The touchpad might be the worst gimmick that anybody has added to a controller. Seriously, who wanted this? Most games ended up using it as a giant select button, and the rest of the conference is kind of terrible. Between actually solid announcements like Transistor and Kingdom Hearts 3, you get a tech demo by Quantic Dream, Diablo 3's PlayStation exclusive shoulder pads, and 3 whole minutes dedicated to the CEO of Sony Entertainment telling you how many movies they own.
PlayStation, Sony Pictures, Sony Music, Sony ATV Music Publishing, PlayStation 4, PlayStation Network, PlayStation 4, Video Unlimited, Sony Pictures, Crackle, Sony Music Entertainment, Daft Punk, 9 Inch Nails, Jack White, PlayStation Network, Music Unlimited, Sony Pictures, Community, Breaking Bad, Spider-Man, Resident Evil, This Is the End, PlayStation 4, Sony Pictures, PlayStation Network, PlayStation 4, PlayStation Network, Sony Pictures, PlayStation 4.
But you don't remember that because what was important was the soundbite. Xbox's downward spiral was complete and they could try to claw their way back up, but That moment put the Xbox One's sales at less than half of the PS4. Microsoft could not compete with Sony in the hardware space, so while the PS4 continued to rise in sales with a bevy of incredibly successful exclusives, Microsoft started expanding Xbox. Xbox games stopped being exclusive to a single piece of hardware, with ports to Windows 10 becoming more common by 2016, introducing the Xbox Play Anywhere label by the end of that year, giving people who owned those games on consoles access to free copies on PC with support for cross-saves. And they've expanded beyond that, with Cuphead being the first proper Xbox exclusive to come to a Nintendo platform, and Game Pass, a subscription service that gives you access to a fuck ton of games for a monthly fee, with Xbox exclusives coming day one on Game Pass. A move that Sony has since attempted to copy. And in their attempts to stick their fingers into every single pie imaginable, they've gotten really into buying game studios recently. Every year at E3, Phil Spencer, Microsoft's current CEO of gaming, and yes, that is his actual title, would take the stage to announce the usually small studios they purchased that year. Surely that is not a terrible omen for anything to come. On the 1st of September 2020, Microsoft went bigger and announced their plans to purchase ZeniMax, the parent company of Bethesda, for $7.5 billion. To put it simply, if this sausage is worth $1 billion, this deal would be worth 7.5 sausages, which is too many sausages for one person. On January 18th, 2022, Microsoft announced they were buying Activision Blizzard for $68.7 billion. To put that simply, that's far too many sausages. This turned heads, namely the heads of the Federal Trade Commission, America's antitrust body, and noted sausage haters, who sued Microsoft in an attempt to stop the deal going through. And so, Microsoft went to court. From the 22nd to the 26th of June 2023, Microsoft hashed it out with the FTC over their purchase of ActiBliz. There were salacious details, incredible twists, and testimonies from some of gaming's biggest names, like CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment Jim Ryan, and CEO of being the slimiest bastard imaginable, Bobby Kotick. Microsoft's stance on why they should be allowed to purchase ActiBliz responds directly to Sony's fears that Microsoft will use the purchase to snatch Call of Duty, Activision's biggest title, away from them by making it exclusive or worse on other platforms. Something to note, Sony already does this? Every Call of Duty game, from Black Ops 3 all the way to this year's Modern Warfare 3, not to be confused with the last Modern Warfare 3, were produced with an exclusivity deal with Sony to get exclusive content and preferential treatment for the games on PlayStation. They are 100% bullshitting here. Microsoft's response to this concern is that they're a little baby. They only make up 16% of the market share against Nintendo and Sony, so they have no way of fighting back no matter what. Like an little baby. A shocking amount of the trial is dedicated to the FTC trying to argue that you shouldn't count Nintendo, creating a 5-day long back and forth of the FTC going they shouldn't count and Microsoft going nah-uh. The FTC argues that Microsoft should 100% be considered a viable threat for Sony because if they're allowed to buy ActiBliz, they may make games like Call of Duty exclusive, snatching them away from Sony or making them worse. The FTC's main argument was just Sony's argument. Like, verbatim. If you're going to argue on the merits of a giant evil corporation buying up companies like its property from a consumer perspective, it's probably not the best idea to center your arguments on the argument of a different giant evil corporation. The details of this trial are mind-numbing to read. There's a point where the FTC actually attempts to make a compelling argument about massive corporations owning everything. Microsoft and Sony's constant one-upsmanship through the respective game subscription services will inevitably lead to only having two options for consumers in a constant vie for market domination. This only gets brought up in the final statements. The trial was a farce. So much information that was meant to be redacted because massive corporations don't want the rubbish in the public eye leaked because they didn't realize that when you mark something with a pen, it doesn't actually erase it, and it's really easy to see what's under it when it's scanned in. So obviously, when the time came to rule, the judge sided with Microsoft because the FTC presumably just did all the research on the final day and copied Sony's homework. So Microsoft gets to buy the big company, and they get another leg up in the never-ending console war. Though, Phil seems to disagree. When questioned on if Microsoft lost the console war, he had this to say.
As the console wars is a social construct with the community, I would never want to count our community out. They're big fans.
Which, are they, Phil? Are the console wars a social construct? In the 1980s, in the aftermath of a market crash involving Atari and ET, a small company called Nintendo, known for arcade hits like Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr., would release their first home video game console in the US. But because of Spielberg's aforementioned wrinkled bastard, they had to take a different approach. The crash left a stink across the video game market, so the choice was made to market this new system as a toy. On top of the games console, it would come with a whole bunch of tat, like a robot and a gun. This console wouldn't be a video game system, it would be the Nintendo Entertainment System. It paid off. The NES sold over 1 million units in 1986, with a lineup of only Nintendo-developed titles. Though it wasn't long until third-party developers showed up, under an agreement with Nintendo that saw them taking 30% of the profits. This essentially created the modern video game market. But due to Nintendo's unique position in the market, reviving an industry that many thought was dead and buried, there wasn't any competition to speak of. They had an iron grip over the market. Many would attempt to challenge them, but nothing stuck until Sega hired Tom Kalinske, the former Mattel CEO known for bringing toys to the masses and incredibly unhealthy medicine to children with Flintstones vitamins. Tom had an idea. To beat Nintendo, Sega would have to go aggressive, marketing their next system, the Sega Genesis, in direct opposition to Nintendo. Mario was a family-friendly working man. Sonic was a rambunctious teen. The NES and SNES were slow, and the Genesis had blast processing. Sega was for cool dudes, and Nintendo was for big dumb babies. If you bought Nintendo over Sega, you were a big dumb baby. Goo goo gaga, go fuck yourself. This strategy worked, because kids are morons. So much of marketing in this era relies on kids being exploitable, and those kids helped Sega take 55% of the market share. It didn't last long, however, because as it turns out, Nintendo weren't a static object and could just do the exact same thing back at them, producing a massive marketing campaign for Donkey Kong Country to combat Sega's upcoming launch of Sonic & Knuckles, proudly shouting to the world that this game was not on Sega. This was the beginning of Sega's downward spiral. After a great start taking on Nintendo, they had no idea how to continue that success, with the internal clash between Sega's American and Japanese divisions not doing them any favours. Accounts differ on what actually happened because nobody really wants to admit that they're the cause of the major downfall of a massive company, but the short of it is, Sega cannibalized themselves in the vital North American market by spreading their next generation offerings between add-ons for the Sega Genesis and their actual next generation system, the Saturn. Sega's first add-on, the Sega CD, was a moderate success, but its follow-up, the 32X, bombed hard, because as it turns out, people didn't want extra shit to pile onto their existing systems. They were hungry for something new. And to their credit, Sega obliged? To the surprise of many, at the very first E3 in 1995, Tom Kalinske took the stage to announce that the Sega Saturn, slated for release in autumn of that year, would actually launch immediately for $399. At the same show, a fledgling company known for their electronics products, movie business, and a bunch of game shows your dad likes, would announce the price of their upcoming system, the Sony PlayStation.
$299.
Those 2 seconds represent the actual moment that Sony overtook Sega. And the rest is history. All of this is to say that Phil is wrong when he says the console wars are a social construct, because they're not. They're a market construct. The idea of the console war is and always has been a marketing tool, created by Sega to combat Nintendo. Sega are far removed from the console race now, and Nintendo aren't really playing the same game as Sony and Microsoft, but the rules are the same. The NES and Genesis weren't the first generation, but they were the first generation to fight the console war, and every generation since then has just been a continuation of that. An endless, ever-expanding competition that we put up with because
Basic economic theory demonstrates that when firms have to compete for customers, it leads to lower prices, higher quality goods and services, greater variety, and more innovation.
That quote is from the official White House website, by the way. That's right, I'm going to the top for this. Joe Biden, your days are fucking numbered, punk. This is the line. Competition breeds innovation. Having multiple console manufacturers all vying for attention is good because it means they'll work harder, making consoles better and making them cheaper, bringing in new technologies that'll push the industry forward. But does that actually happen? Maybe it did at one point, but these days, evidently not. Microsoft wanted the 360 to take on the PS3, so they rushed to get it out in the holiday season. It paid off for them, but it also resulted in the Red Ring of Death, a hardware failure affecting so many people that could have been easily prevented if they didn't speed through testing to make it to market. The Wii beat them both, so they rushed to copy it. Motion controls were the future of gaming, but in 2023, 2 out of 3 consoles have some form of motion control, but they're hardly better than the original Wii remote. Motion controls are mostly locked to enthusiast hardware like VR. And since then, the market has stalled. Consoles are now bigger and more expensive than ever, with incremental upgrades every so often. The only actual competition is insular between 2 or 3 parties, and honestly, it's been that way since Sega. The only real shift then has been Sega's exit and Sony and Microsoft's entrance. The players are different, but the game is the same. I'd argue it's gotten even worse, actually. If you really think about it beyond the boundary, fundamentally, how can this market change? Who's the next Sony or Sega or Microsoft? Because that's what competition requires when the market stagnates. The lemonade stand that can sell enough copies of the next Call of Duty to challenge Raytheon. I don't think it can change. When Sega entered the market, video games were a risky venture, but they were a manageable industry to enter and play around with. The market expands and Sony wants in. They try to work with Sega or Nintendo, but that all falls through. They're still a big enough company to have an in. The market expands even further and Microsoft breaks in. They didn't see major success immediately, but that didn't matter because they could take the initial hit. Windows was already a massive success. And even they had to diversify later down the line, expanding beyond the Xbox console to PC ports and subscription services. With the game industry bigger than ever, how could anybody shake things up? If you want to enter this space, you've got to compete with companies with literal decades of experience doing this one thing. You've got to make the hardware, offset costs through sales, fund exclusives, gain the trust of publishers, and make enough deals so people actually want to buy the thing. Remember that poorly redacted document during the trial? Well, one of the things that Sony didn't want revealed was that one of their late PS4 exclusives, The Last of Us Part 2, cost $220 million to develop. That's not even including the marketing cost, which I presume would have to be massive because at E3 2018, Sony built a fucking church to show a 10-minute gameplay demo of that game. I'm no market analyst, but churches are probably fucking expensive. That Activision deal is worth $68.7 billion. That is an unfathomable amount of money. Most companies wouldn't be able to compete with a deal worth 10% of that. I don't think that deal is going to make the industry any better. There's silver linings to it, like the CWA putting their support behind it and Microsoft signing a deal to stay neutral on union matters, but it's hard not to see that as a hollow gesture. It's better than being outright against it, like most companies are, but the timing makes it look like an attempt to curry favor from regulatory boards over the deal. On top of that, Microsoft's hands-off approach on the studios they buy clearly hasn't helped, with titles like Redfall and Halo Infinite suffering from a lack of direction. It's even worse for the other side. Despite a $220 million budget and a 5-year development cycle, Sony's crowning jewel, Naughty Dog, crunched like hell to get The Last of Us Part 2 out the door on time. As these corporations spend ballooning amounts facilitating this constant competition, I think it's worth asking, how does competition benefit anybody except these console manufacturers? Innovations like subscription services have already been cannibalized by these titans. It wasn't necessarily a good innovation, but cloud gaming is the same story. Granted, one of the major players in that space was Google Stadia, headed up by Phil Harrison. And Microsoft made a historic partnership on a title using cloud technology with Hideo Kojima, so maybe cloud gaming was actually dead on arrival. Consoles used to be in the forefront of gaming's future. Different consoles had different architectures and technologies. The Genesis was the first big 16-bit system, and Nintendo followed suit. The PS1 was the first big push for bigger, cheaper discs that made games better. Xbox's focus on online gaming changed the way we play forever. Now, what's the difference between the PS5 and the Xbox Series X? They both run the same games. You couldn't make Final Fantasy VII on an N64. CDs let that game exist. Now, what's stopping Final Fantasy XVI from running on an Xbox? What's stopping Starfield from running on a PlayStation? Competition. Money. Even if the Microsoft deal fell through, we'd still be in the exact same place because the console market has stagnated. Nothing moves forward. Competition doesn't innovate, it just divides and conquers. That's what the console war represents. It doesn't push us forward anymore. It doesn't give us more options. It holds us back and limits us to a couple mega powerful corporations in a never-ending gridlock that nobody can beat. There are no winners. There are no losers. There is only the console war. And I can only think of one way we can beat it. That's right. We gotta bring back the Sega Saturn. Remember that joke? It's a console built exclusively for weird guys who really like to tell you how much they like underrated gems like Panzer Dragoon 2's or Power Slave. Weird guys, weird guys, weird guys. I was the weird guy excited about Power Slave. Give me like $100 million, I bet I can bring it back. I can be trusted with your money. Oh, sorry, I was just playing Power Slave on my Sega Saturn. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, leave a like, comment, subscribe, all the stuff that helps me out with the algorithm. You can follow me on Twitter at AlwaysBetOnDunk, and you can support me on Patreon if you'd like to see more of this. You get behind-the-scenes content, updates, and exclusive videos like a 2-part commentary on Sony and Microsoft's E3 2010 conferences that I did with my friend Woodaba. They're some of my favorite things I've done on there, so check them out. You can also get your name read out in the credits like the names of Ink Assassin and Fotail. And if you'd like that, go to patreon.com/alwaysbetondunk. And once again, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. I'm not actually playing anything. This was a lie.